Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. When I originally put up the poll for this show, I know I said that it would be the second review for the month. I'm also going to be reviewing A Sign of Affection, which lost the last romance poll I did by a really close margin. It occurred to me as I went to start it that obviously it would make more sense to do the romance anime for the mid-month review, as close to Valentine's Day as possible. So I changed things around last minute, and we're starting off February with the sci-fi murder mystery instead. The Perfect Insider is a tale of three geniuses. In one corner, you've got Sohei Saikawa, a young professor, apparently of architectural engineering. I have to admit that wasn't something I knew until I went to double-check it for this review. I spent the whole anime thinking he taught like computer programming or something, because those are the skills that are on display for us throughout the story, but I guess that's not really important. Saikawa is respected in his field and has won numerous awards for his work, but from the beginning, we see him struggling with a desire for freedom. Some of it's the typical fantasies of a scholar who's passionate about his work. He wishes he could just be set loose somewhere with unlimited funding to research whatever his heart desires, unhindered by the commitment to his job here at the university. But we also hear, pretty much from the moment you meet him, about his desire to be free in the sense that he'd like to be a little less human. He feels a bit held back by the constraints of his human body and what he sees as the limits of his own intelligence, particularly where those things lead into emotions getting in the way of being purely logical. But despite his dry, reserved demeanor, Saikawa is generally well-liked by his students. One student in particular, Moe Nishinosono, is the second pillar of this story. She has a crush on the professor that she couldn't be any less subtle about, and I won't pretend her possessiveness and jealousy of every other woman he's friendly with wasn't annoying sometimes. Okay, a lot of the time. But Moe was an interesting enough character to make up for it. And an important character. Her parents died in a plane crash when she was young, and Saikawa was her father's last and best student, a protege of sorts. So her infatuation was spawned from something a little deeper than your average schoolgirl with a crush story. Moe herself is kind of your typical gifted kid character. But aside from a few times when they rely on her to be their human calculator, her own intelligence isn't usually the focus of her story. Moe often serves as the human touch in a tale where the other main leads do their best to be coldly logical at all times. She's the one constantly arguing that you can't take all the emotion out of decision-making. It made her something of a window into this world for the average viewer. Because who this story mostly revolves around is the woman Saikawa describes as the only true genius of their time. Shiki Magata is an unparalleled programmer who earned her doctorate degree at just 11 years old. But there's a dark side to this triumphant tale. At 14, she was arrested for murdering her parents. The court ruled that she wasn't guilty, but only due to insanity. So, not that she didn't commit the crime, just that she couldn't be held responsible for it. After the trial, she basically went back to work, but has spent the last 15 years confined to her lab on a remote island. But Dr. Magata has been making more public appearances through video interviews lately, and the story really starts when she agrees to one with Moe. Well, technically the interview happened before we're brought into the story, but I don't think a single episode passed without flashing back to some part of it. And we'll get to that interview in time, but for the introduction of this story, the important part is that this means Moe has connections now into the mysterious laboratory that holds the scientist Saikawa so admires. But then they get there, and things get a little weird. For one, Shiki isn't exactly out here enjoying her own personal island paradise. The facility is staffed by a few other scientists, the director and his wife, and 2 security guards. Shiki has an apartment suite inside that she hasn't stepped foot outside of, or allowed anyone else into, in 15 years. Any supplies she needs are passed through a small chute, and the rest of the building is under 24-hour surveillance. She wasn't formally sentenced to be here as a punishment, but it definitely feels like an imprisonment to the outside observer. When they arrive, they're told the high-tech system that everything runs on here has been malfunctioning. No one has been able to communicate with Dr. Magata for several days, but when they're shown to her rooms, the outer doors suddenly unlock, all by themselves. A moment later, Shiki's body is wheeled out on an automated cart, dressed up like it's her wedding day, missing her arms and legs. Reviewing the video footage confirms that no one's ever gone inside, and so we have a true locked room murder mystery on our hands. If there's one word that came to mind while watching this anime, it's cerebral. They really pushed that idea from day one that super intelligent people just experience the world differently. Moe aside, a lot of moments that should be emotional fell a little flat. No one reacts quite the way you'd expect them to, and maybe in Shiki's case there's some sense to that. No one really knew her. They mourn what the world lost without her brain and talents, but not the woman herself. The next development is a little different. At the time of the body discovery, the director of the facility, who's also Shiki's uncle, had been away, off to pick up a younger sister no one knew Shiki had. When the two return, they tell him to use the helicopter's radio to call for help, as their system is still cut off. But when they go back out to check on him, they find the director's also been murdered, and the radio system's been destroyed. This upped the stakes a bit, or at least it should have. The question remained as to how her limbs were amputated, but I'd had a theory from the beginning that Shiki may have engineered her own death somehow. The director's death seemed to blow that theory away. Confirmation that the killer was still alive and on the base somewhere, but this still isn't met with the sense of urgency you'd expect. I'm not sure if they were supposed to look suspicious for it, to provide a red herring or something, but the scientists are almost eerily confident in their technology. The files show that no one entered her room, so it's not possible that anyone got in. They'll wait for the police to show up and figure it out. Frankly, there comes a point where it starts to feel a little unreasonable that they're not all turning on each other. So the Perfect Insider was lacking in any of that kind of drama, and I'm honestly on the fence about whether I mean that as a critique. On one hand, it felt weird not to see it, but it also felt intentional, like they were aiming to be a more highbrow kind of murder mystery, which fit given the kind of people this story was about, the victim at the center of it all. To put it simply, this is definitely a series that feels a little dry sometimes, but I didn't really mind. In part because I really liked some of the other things they were doing with the characters. The longer the series went on, the more flashbacks we got to Moe's interview and Shiki's childhood, and just got a better look at how her brain worked. The clearer it became that Moe and Saikawa were kind of both foils for her in their own ways. Saikawa is incredibly gifted himself, but he views himself as ordinary compared to her, still tied down by human emotions, something she's ascended past. But, more than anyone else, he can understand how she might view her life here as the ultimate freedom, rather than the exile it looks like. He mentions to one of the other scientists that if he'd known about this facility when he was in college, he would have basically sold his soul to come live and work here. But he doesn't quite feel that way anymore, and not just because of the murders. There are too many connections he has to the outside world now, and his biggest source of tension with Moe was his tendency to see that kind of sentimentality as a weakness. As I said in her introduction, Moe is basically the emotional bridge into this tale for a true ordinary person. She spends a lot of time trying to rationalize Shiki and her past and how that relates to her murder, through that sentimental lens of all the things that make us human. No matter how often Saikawa tries to tell her that someone like Shiki Magata just doesn't fit into those types of boxes, Officially, their interview happened for academic purposes, but the questions turned personal very quickly. They're connected in the way that they were both orphaned very young, but their characters are defined by how it affected them. Moe mostly wanted to talk to her to try and make sense of how anyone could murder their own parents and not be haunted by it, and she leaves without really getting that answer. But Shiki is equally interested in the day Moe's parents died, and the mystery of her own murder starts to unravel a bit when you look into that disconnect between their experiences. If you're a fan of murder mysteries, I'd say The Perfect Insider is definitely worth looking into. It's actually only 11 episodes, though it didn't feel shorter than usual while I was watching it. It's one of those series that's in a weird place for me, judgment-wise. I wouldn't hesitate to say that it's good, but I didn't love it personally. But to get into the things that didn't totally click with me will lead this review into spoiler territory. And I do want to talk about those things, so if you want to experience all the big reveals for this story for yourself, just know that you're in for an interesting ride. The Perfect Insider presents itself a little differently from the murder mysteries you may be used to. If you're sticking around for the rest of my thoughts, you have been warned. There was one other big part of Shiki's life that we see mirrored in Moe and Saikawa, unfortunately. By the end of the series, I wasn't feeling the romance for more reasons than just because Moe's jealousy made her a little annoying. Shiki's questions about the day her parents died start to unearth some memories Moe had repressed. Namely, that Saikawa was there that day and stayed with her for some time afterwards to help her get through her initial depression. These memories lead into a few others that reveal that he knew her as a child. This development turned an age difference that could have been fine if they'd first met and grown closer as adults into something weird. Even if the infatuation had remained a one-way thing, I don't think I would have questioned it. I think that's pretty believable. A young girl growing perhaps unhealthily attached to someone who was there for her during the worst time of her life. When this backstory was first introduced, I was optimistic it would lead into some good personal growth for Moe as a character, especially because she didn't initially remember the extent of her connection to Saikawa and why she felt so close to him. The crush almost feels like a deflection, something to distract her from her grief. I would have liked to see her overcome that. But then, in the final episode, Saikawa starts dropping hints that the crush wasn't so one-sided after all. There's one line in particular that I can't let go of. Moe's memories had been focused on the dress she was wearing that day, her favorite purple dress that her mother had made for her, that she hadn't been able to wear after that day. Saikawa says something along the lines of, "You'd gone from being someone who cried when I saw through your magic tricks to someone who looked good in a purple dress." And that's just... I should note that she was still only like 12 or 13 at the time of the accident. But still, if this had been the only moment, I may have been able to write it off as unintentional creepiness. Maybe the writers really didn't see how that came across. Unfortunately, like I said, this was mirrored in Shiki's story, which we get bits and pieces of through flashbacks in pretty much every single episode. And so you learn really early on that there were some illegal things going on between Shiki and her uncle. Normally I'd say he was abusing her, but this show really made a point to drive home in every single scene that he was the weaker personality in this equation, and she was really pushing for it. There are so many loose ends here for me. For one, it's never made clear whether the aunt knew. I talked about the other scientists being a little too distant to be true red herrings. The aunt is oddly unbothered in the aftermath of her husband and niece's deaths, by which point we already know that she had potentially more motive than anyone. But even after the secret's revealed to everyone else, eliciting a round table of shocked gasps that was far too short a reaction in my opinion, we never check back in with the aunt to get her reaction. And then, something kind of unforgivable to me, we're given next to nothing on what Shiki's relationship with her parents was like. We know she saw their existence as the last big hurdle between her and her freedom, but that leaves so many questions as to why this supposed genius couldn't just wait another 4 years until she was a legal adult. I don't remember anything hinting at the Magatas being abusive or exploiting their daughter's celebrity status, and trust me, I was looking for it because it might have proven she was just manipulating her uncle into helping her kill her parents. But we're not given anything like that. Furthermore, the final scene between Shiki and the director is uncomfortably sweet. They really do seem to be playing it like a genuine romance. The two couples' stories viewed together just start to promote this narrative that makes me question some things about the original author. Shiki's tale was twisted enough that I think they could have gotten away with that one. Confirming something between Moe and Saikawa just left this stain on the series as a whole that I can't quite get past. And there was one other big thing that leaves me feeling conflicted about this tale. Here's where we reach the major spoilers for the end. Shiki and the director's relationship ultimately comes to light when they confirm that no one else was able to get into Shiki's rooms in the last 15 years. So how did the killer do it? Shiki was pregnant when she went into isolation. She gave birth to a daughter that first year, who she was raising to replace her, and killing her to cement in her independence at the same age Shiki killed her own parents was all part of the plan. But then something threw a wrench in that plan. Moe's interview, speaking about Moe's parents' deaths and the effect it clearly had on her, made the daughter question some things, and ultimately she couldn't go through with it. The body was the daughter, and the mystery turns to trying to track down Shiki. I really liked this reveal, but it turned The Perfect Insider into a very different kind of experience for me. One of those, if I had been writing this, I would have done it so much differently kind of shows. And personally, when the writer in me takes over, it's hard for me to let go of that version of what the series in question could have been. The daughter is such a fascinating character, and it's tragic that we never get to actually meet her. They make it out like she willingly went to her own death after having doubts that she couldn't kill her mom, and something about that writing is so weak to me. There's not enough of an acknowledgement of how fucked up this whole situation was. Honestly, they kind of make it out to be a shortcoming on the daughter's part, that despite being raised in isolation with her, at the end of the day, she was just an ordinary girl. She didn't inherit Shiki's genius, and so she couldn't understand the world the way Shiki did. I think true satisfaction with this series depends on one thing: buying into this idea they were selling that Shiki Magata was a superior being who could basically do no wrong, and if you disagreed, you just weren't smart enough to understand her. And I never really did buy into that. I think there is some hope for us non-believers. Saikawa, who admired her more than anyone, had a chance to run off with her and live life the way she does, and he turned it down in the end. Of course, that complicated the story in other ways, but I think I've said enough on that front. I've actually already mentioned the biggest thing holding me back from loving this anime. Ironically, for a show about such smart characters, it feels almost like it's been lobotomized. It works so hard to cut itself off from any reasonable level of emotion when the pieces were all there to make a really moving tale. If I was writing this story, I would have focused a lot more on the daughter, let her go through with killing her mother, but then go a little crazy with the freedom and the need to find out who she is as her own person once Shiki's gone. While we're at it, maybe let Shiki herself have a change of heart and set up her own death as an atonement of sorts. Acknowledge that maybe she didn't understand the world and human relationships as completely as she thought she did at 13. Genius be damned. Let the aunt have the revenge she deserves. The island was still cut off. Maybe she'd be the one to find the daughter in hiding. Realize how few options there are for who her father could be, and look at that, now they're co-conspirators. And maybe, after hearing so much about the great Dr. Magata, Moe would realize that that wasn't actually who she was talking to in her interview. Let the two girls actually have a connection, if you're going to write the whole story in a way that hinges on that. I know this is a personal opinion, but I just feel like they sidestepped all the things that could have made this show great. Sometimes writing the review opens my eyes in ways simply watching the anime didn't. I swear I did enjoy this show while I was watching it. I do still think it does a lot of interesting things and is worth checking out if you haven't. It pushed my brain to analyze things I may never have considered on my own, but now that I've had some time to sit with it and really process it, I don't see myself ever rewatching it. You can make of that what you will. Thank you for watching.